If you've been working with Power Apps for any length of time, you've probably run into difficulties around the concept of delegation. Let me give you an example. So here I have a basic demo application called Submissions. I'm going to click this button to visit the submission screen, where we will find a data table that is showing all the records from a SharePoint list. Well, it would be more useful to me to actually filter this data table to show only those records that belong to the current logged in user, the person who's using the Power App. So I'll go to the items property of this data table and I will filter it. So we're going to filter submissions and we will use the submitted by column. And we're going to grab the email address from that column. And we're going to set that equal to Office 365 users dot myprofile v2 dot mail. And after a moment, you can see that it is showing me only the two records that I created or that are marked as being submitted by me. But we also see this error here, or warning, delegation warning. The filter part of this formula might not work correctly on large data sets. So what does that mean? If we look at the Microsoft web page regarding delegation, and I'll put a link to this in the description, it describes delegation as where the expressiveness of Power Apps formulas meets the need to minimize data moving over the network. In short, Power Apps will delegate the processing of data to the data source rather than moving the data to the app for processing locally. So delegation is basically like this. If you walk into a restaurant, look at the menu, and say, I want a hamburger to the server, they will bring you a hamburger. You've delegated the making of that hamburger to the kitchen staff and to the restaurant, and they will give you what you want. Conversely, if you walk into a restaurant and look at the menu and ask the server, I would like my favorite food, the server doesn't know what your favorite food is. They're going to have to ask you a follow-up question. In Power Apps won't ask that follow-up question. It'll just say, I don't know what you want. I'm going to fetch 500 records for you, and you can figure it out yourself. And I say 500 records because if I go to the settings of my Power App and scroll down a bit, you see this data row limit. And this is how many records Power Apps will retrieve from server-based connections where delegation is not supported, or when it is supported but you didn't create your function in a delegable way. So if you don't construct a delegable function, you're going to get 500 records. You can increase this, but the problem you're going to run into is when you stop working with data demo sets that only have 5 or 6 records in them and you start working with production data and you might have thousands and thousands of records. The data that you're looking for might not be in that group of 500 or 2,000 records that you get when you make a non-delegable request. So let's take a look at this function and figure out why it isn't delegable. So to review, I'm filtering the submissions data set and I'm filtering it to all records where submitted by email is equal to Office 365 users.myprofile2.mail. And if I return to this article and scroll down a bit, it will give me some examples of delegable data sources. I can click the link to SharePoint. And if I look at the filter function, it tells me that that is delegable, and it tells me the different kinds of data that can be delegated to it. If I look at the footnotes under complex, you can see the email and display name are delegable in the person data type. So at first glance, it looks like I'm doing it right. I'm passing in the email of the current user into the filter function. The reason this isn't delegable though is because we're not actually passing in the email of the current user to the filter function. We're passing in another function that gets the email of the current user and then gives that to the filter function. When Power Apps evaluates this expression initially, it sees that it's going to have to do something else in order to get the data that's going to be used for filtering it, and it gives up at that point. It doesn't know necessarily what kind of data it's going to get back. Therefore, it doesn't know that it can make the request to SharePoint in a delegable way. Therefore, this function becomes non-delegable, and you're just going to get the 500 or 2000 records or whatever set by the data row limit in the settings of your app, and you're going to have to go through that on the client side. So how can we make this delegable? Well, the answer really is to take this statement and use it to set a variable. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, and I'll do this on the onVisible property of the screen. And you can see I've already actually done this. Created a variable called var user data, and I'm setting it to Office 365 users .myprofilv2.mail. So I'm going to replace this function with my variable. Var user data. So the idea here is that by the time the screen, or by the time the filter function comes around, we've already evaluated this variable, var user data, and we know going into the function what the data is. It knows that I'm going to be looking for email or records where the email matches mine. And you can see now that we're getting 2 records, but more importantly, we're not getting that delegation warning.